They dragged him off the plane like a criminal. His suit jacket was torn, his glasses crushed under a boot, and the passengers watched in stunned silence as the captain sneered, thinking he had just won a power struggle. But Captain Holloway didn't know who he had just assaulted. He didn't realize that the man in seat 1A wasn't just a passenger. He was the man who signed the checks for the fuel in the tank, the tarmac under the wheels, and the loan that kept the airline afloat. It took 10 minutes to drag him off. It took one phone call to liquidate the entire company. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's a lesson in absolute power. Buckle up. The rain lashed against the reinforced glass of JFK's Terminal 4, blurring the lights of the runway into long, weeping streaks of neon. Inside the cabin of Skyline Airways Flight 909, destined for London Heathrow, the atmosphere was a mix of damp coats and impatient sighs. Isaiah Sterling adjusted the cuffs of his hoodie. It was a simple navy cashmere blend, unbranded, but it cost more than the average Honda Civic. He wasn't trying to flaunt it. In fact, that was the point. Today, Isaiah wasn't the CEO of Sterling Horizon, the global logistics and infrastructure conglomerate that quietly owned half the supply chain in the Western Hemisphere. Today, he was just a tired father trying to get to his daughter's graduation in Oxford. He adjusted his frame in seat 1A. He was a large man, broad-shouldered with a presence that usually commanded a room without him saying a word. But he was exhausted. He had just closed a 70-hour negotiation with the Port Authority of Singapore. He closed his eyes, eager for the pre-flight champagne. "Excuse me, sir. I need to see your boarding pass." Again. The voice was sharp, nasal, and dripping with suspicion. Isaiah opened one eye. Standing over him was Brenda Miller, the lead flight attendant. She had a tight, artificial smile plastered on her face, but her eyes were cold, scanning him up and down with blatant distaste. She held a manifest clipboard against her chest like a shield. "I showed it to you at the door, Brenda," Isaiah said, his voice a deep, calm rumble. He glanced at her name tag. "Well, there's been a discrepancy with the gate count," Brenda snapped, her fingers tapping impatiently on the leather headrest of his seat. "And we have a wait list for first class. I need to verify you're actually supposed to be sitting here." Isaiah sighed, reaching into his pocket and pulling out the crumpled pass. He handed it to her. Brenda snatched it. She stared at it, frowning, almost disappointed that it was valid. "Isaiah Sterling. Seat 1A. She looked up, her eyes narrowing. "You bought this ticket today? With cash?" "I bought it an hour ago," Isaiah corrected gently. "And I used a card. Is there a problem?" "It's just unusual," Brenda muttered, handing it back with a lack of grace. "Usually our first-class cabin is reserved for our frequent flyers, loyalty members, corporate partners." "I am a corporate partner," Isaiah said, closing his eyes again, "in ways you wouldn't believe." "Excuse me?" Brenda bristled. "Nothing. Can I get a water?" "No ice." Brenda stood there for a second too long, her jaw working as if she wanted to say something else. She didn't like his tone. She didn't like his hoodie. And she certainly didn't like the fact that this man, who looked to her like a rapper or an athlete trying too hard, was sitting in the most expensive seat on the plane while she had to serve him. "We aren't doing service until we are airborne," she lied. Isaiah watched her walk away, heading toward the cockpit. He saw her stop and whisper something to the pilot who was standing in the galley doorway, drinking coffee. The pilot, Captain Richard "Rick" Holloway, was a man cut from the cloth of the 1980s. Silver hair, bright white teeth, and an ego that barely fit in the fuselage. Rick leaned out, his eyes locking onto Isaiah in seat 1A. He looked at Brenda, then back at Isaiah, and laughed, a short, dismissive bark of a laugh. Isaiah felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He knew that look. He had seen it in boardrooms in the 90s, at country clubs he was denied entry to, and at banks when he tried to get his first business loan. It was the look of a man who thought he was the predator, looking at what he assumed was prey. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Holloway. We're looking at a slight delay. We seem to have a weight and balance issue in the forward cabin. Sit tight." The plane wasn't moving. The doors were still open. Isaiah checked his watch. If they didn't leave in 20 minutes, he'd miss the connection train to Oxford. He'd miss the ceremony. He saw Brenda marching back down the aisle, this time with a male flight attendant, a nervous-looking young man named Kevin, trailing behind her. "Sir," Brenda said, her voice louder this time. Heads in the business class cabin turned. "We have a situation. We need your seat." Isaiah sat up fully, removing his noise-cancelling headphones. "Excuse me?" "Captain Holloway needs to deadhead a pilot to London for a connecting flight. It's company policy that deadheading captains fly first class. You were the last to book, so you're the first to be bumped." "Bumped?" Isaiah chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "I paid $12,000 for this seat, Brenda. I'm not being bumped." "We can offer you a voucher for $500 and a seat in Economy Plus," Brenda said, her voice taking on that robotic, bureaucratic tone that people use when they know they are screwing you over. "Or we can book you on the flight tomorrow morning." "I have a graduation to attend in 10 hours, Isaiah said, his voice hardening. "I am not moving. Find another seat for your pilot, or have him sit in the jump seat." "The jump seat is for crew only," Brenda snapped, "and the captain requires rest. Look, sir, don't make this difficult. We have the right to refuse service to anyone." "You're refusing service because I was the last to book?" Isaiah asked, raising an eyebrow. "Or is it because you don't think I look like I belong in seat 1A? The cabin went silent. The air pressure seemed to drop. "Don't pull that card with me," Brenda hissed, her face flushing red. "This is about logistics. Now get your bag, or I will have the captain come out here." "Send him," Isaiah said, leaning back and crossing his legs. "I'd love to hear his logic." Brenda spun on her heel and stormed into the cockpit. 2 minutes later, the heavy door flew open. Captain Rick Holloway emerged. He put his hat on, adjusting the brim, and marched toward seat 1A like a sheriff walking into a saloon to clean up the trash. The drama was just beginning. Captain Rick Holloway loomed over Isaiah. He was a big mon, though mostly around the waist, and he smelled of stale coffee and expensive cologne. He placed a heavy hand on the overhead bin, leaning down so his face was inches from Isaiah's. "Problem here, son?" Rick asked. Isaiah looked at the captain's name tag, then directly into his eyes. He didn't blink. "The only problem, Captain, is that your staff seems to think a ticket is a suggestion rather than a contract." "It is a contract," Rick smiled, a shark-like grin. "A contract that says we control this metal tube, and right now I have a senior pilot from our partner airline who needs to get to London to fly a 707. If he doesn't get there, 300 people are stranded. Now you're the odd man out. You're moving." "I own a logistics company, Captain," Isaiah said calmly. "I know how deadheading works. You plan it weeks in advance. You don't kick a paying first-class passenger off the plane 5 minutes before pushback, unless someone screwed up. Who screwed up, Rick? Did you forget to book your buddy a seat? Rick's face turned a shade of crimson that clashed with his uniform. Isaiah had struck a nerve. That was exactly what had happened. Rick had promised a favor to a pal, forgotten to log it, and was now trying to fix his mistake by bullying the passenger he assumed had the least clout. "Listen to me. You listen good," Rick growled, lowering his voice to a menacing whisper. "I don't care who you think you are. On this plane, I am God. You get up, you move to row 34, seat E. That's a middle seat by the toilets, by the way, or you get off my plane. Those are your options." "I'm not moving," Isaiah stated. He pulled out his phone. "And I suggest you return to the cockpit and fly this plane before you make a mistake you can't undo." Rick straightened up. He looked at the passengers watching him. He felt his authority slipping. A man like Rick Halloway couldn't handle that. "Right," Rick said, nodding slowly. "Have it your way." He turned to Brenda. "Call Port Authority. Tell them we have a disruptive passenger who is making threats against the crew. Tell them he's refusing to comply with federal flight crew instructions. Level 3 threat." Isaiah's eyes widened slightly. A level 3 threat? That was reserved for physical violence or credible bomb threats. This man was weaponizing the law to cover his own incompetence. "You're lying," Isaiah said, his voice rising for the first time. "I haven't threatened anyone. I am sitting in the seat I paid for." "I feel threatened," Brenda chimed in, stepping forward, playing her part perfectly. "He was aggressive with me earlier. I don't feel safe flying with him." "There you go," Rick said, smirking. "Crew doesn't feel safe. That's a federal offense, buddy." Rick marched back to the cockpit to make the call. The atmosphere in the cabin turned toxic. Passengers began to whisper. "Just move, man." A guy in a suit across the aisle muttered, "We want to go home." "Yeah, stop causing trouble," an older woman added. Isaiah looked around. They didn't see a businessman standing his ground. They saw a disruption. They saw a stereotype. He felt a familiar, cold rage settling in his chest. He tapped his phone screen, unlocking it. He didn't call the police. He didn't call a lawyer. He opened his contacts and scrolled to a saved number listed simply as Gerald, Chairman, Zephyr Global. Zephyr Global was the parent company of Skyline Airways. He hit dial, but the signal was weak inside the metal tube. The call failed. Before he could try again, the front cabin door opened. 3 Port Authority police officers boarded. They were breathless, hands resting near their holsters, scanning the cabin for the threat. Brenda pointed a manicured finger straight at Isaiah. "That's him. He's refusing to leave, and he threatened the captain." The lead officer, a burly sergeant named Kowalski, marched up to Isaiah. "Sir, grab your bags. You're coming with us." "Officer, this is a civil dispute over a seat," Isaiah said, keeping his hands visible. "I have not threatened anyone. The captain is lying to cover a scheduling error." "I don't care about the seat," Kowalski barked. "The pilot in command wants you off. That means you're trespassing. Now stand up, or we will drag you up." "I am asking you to check the cameras," Isaiah said, his voice steady but intense. "I am asking you to listen to reason. If you touch me, if you remove me from this plane unlawfully, the liability will be catastrophic." "Is that a threat?" Kowalski asked, stepping into the row. "It's a fact," Isaiah said. "Sir, stand up!" Kowalski shouted. Isaiah didn't move. He remained seated, his dignity anchoring him to the spot. Kowalski didn't wait. He lunged forward, grabbing Isaiah by the lapel of his expensive hoodie. The other two officers swarmed in. "Get your hands off me!" Isaiah shouted, the struggle beginning. They didn't treat him like a CEO. They didn't treat him like a human. One officer grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back with enough force to strain the rotator cuff. Kowalski grabbed him by the neck of his clothes and yanked. Isaiah was hauled out of the seat. His glasses were knocked off his face, skittering across the floor. He heard a crunch as a boot landed on them. "Stop, you're hurting him!" A young woman in the second row screamed, holding up her phone, recording everything. "Back up!" the third officer yelled at the passengers. They dragged Isaiah Sterling down the narrow aisle of the first-class cabin. He didn't fight back physically. He knew that would be a death sentence, but he didn't make it easy. He was dead weight. They hauled him past the galley, his legs scraping against the floor. Captain Rick Halloway stood in the cockpit doorway, arms crossed, watching with a satisfied sneer. As Isaiah was dragged past him, gasping for air, their eyes met. "You should have just moved to row 34, boy," Rick whispered. Isaiah, despite the pain in his shoulder and the humiliation burning his face, managed to focus his gaze on the captain. "You just killed this airline, Rick," Isaiah rasped. Rick laughed. "Get him out of here." They threw him onto the jet bridge. The cold air hit him. The door of the plane slammed shut behind him, sealing his fate. And theirs. Isaiah lay on the dirty carpet of the jet bridge for a moment, gathering his breath. Officer Kowalski stood over him, panting. "You're under arrest for trespassing and disorderly conduct," Kowalski said. "Stand up." Isaiah stood up slowly. He brushed the dust off his cashmere hoodie. He felt his pocket. His phone was still there. Broken screen, but functional. He looked at Kowalski. "I'm not going to resist, officer. Take me to the station. But I need one phone call. And I suggest you let me make it before you process the paperwork." Kowalski rolled his eyes. Yeah. You all want a phone call. Let's go." As they walked him up the jet bridge, Isaiah Sterling wasn't thinking about the graduation he was going to miss. He was thinking about the acquisition merger he had approved last week. He was thinking about the debt structure of Skyline Airways. He was thinking about the fact that he was the majority shareholder of the bank that held the lien on every single aircraft in Captain Halloway's fleet. The plane began to push back from the gate. Isaiah watched it through the terminal window as he was handcuffed. "Fly while you can, Rick," he thought. "Because once you land, you're never taking off again." The holding cell at JFK's Terminal 4 wasn't designed for comfort. It was designed to strip away dignity. It was a 10 by 10 box of cinder blocks, painted a nauseating shade of institutional beige, smelling of bleach and old sweat. Isaiah sat on the metal bench, bolted to the wall. His shoulder throbbed with a dull, sickening heat where the rotator cuff had been strained. His hoodie, Italian cashmere, custom woven, was torn at the collar, covered in the grime of the jet bridge floor. Across the room, Officer Kowalski sat at a metal desk, pecking away at a keyboard with 2 fingers. He looked bored. To him, this was just another Tuesday. Another disruptive passenger processed and dumped into the system. "Name," Kowalski grunted, not looking up. "Isaiah James Sterling," Isaiah said. His voice was quiet, eerily calm. "Date of birth?" Isaiah gave it. "Occupation?" Isaiah paused. "Capital allocation." Kowalski stopped typing. He looked up, squinting. "What? Like a stockbroker?" "Something like that," Isaiah said. "Officer, I need my phone call. My lawyer needs to be informed before you file those charges." "You'll get your call when I'm done booking you," Kowalski snapped. "Empty your pockets, everything on the desk." Isaiah stood up slowly, wincing as his shoulder popped. He reached into his pockets and pulled out his items, placing them on the cold steel table one by one. First, the broken iPhone 15 Pro Max. Second, a slim alligator skin wallet. Third, a heavy black metal card that made a distinct clack when it hit the table. Kowalski reached for the wallet. He opened it, flipping through the IDs. He saw the driver's license. Then he saw the other cards. There were no standard credit cards, no Visas, no MasterCards with airline miles. There was the black metal card, an American Express Centurion, but not the standard one. This one had a diamond chip embedded in the center. It was the invitation-only tier above the Centurion, reserved for individuals who moved economies, not just money. Kowalski frowned. He picked up a business card tucked in the back flap. It was heavy stock, cream-colored, with embossed black lettering. Sterling Horizon Group. Isaiah Sterling, chairman and CEO Kowalski, stared at it. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. He turned back to his computer and typed Isaiah Sterling into Google. He hit enter. Kowalski's eyes widened. The first result wasn't a LinkedIn profile. It was a Forbes headline from 3 days ago. "The Titan of Logistics, How Isaiah Sterling Became the Most Powerful Man in Global Infrastructure." The second result was a photo of Isaiah shaking hands with the President of France. The third result was a live ticker of Sterling Horizon's stock price. The market cap was in the trillions. Kowalski felt a cold bead of sweat roll down his spine. He looked at the man sitting on the bench. The man looked different now. The torn hoodie didn't look like rags anymore. It looked like the eccentricity of a billionaire. The silence wasn't submission. It was the gathering of a storm. You own Sterling Horizon?" Kowalski stammered. "I founded it," Isaiah corrected. "And I also sit on the board of the Port Authority's pension fund, which, if I'm not mistaken, manages the retirement benefits for this precinct." Kowalski swallowed hard. The air in the room suddenly felt very thin. Before Kowalski could say anything, the door to the holding area burst open. A younger officer, Officer Miller, rushed in, holding his phone up, his face pale. "Sarge, you gotta see this," Miller yelled. "Not now, Miller," Kowalski hissed, trying to figure out how to undo the last hour. "No, Sarge, seriously. It's trending. #1 on Twitter. #1 on TikTok. It's got 5 million views in 20 minutes. Miller shoved the phone into Kowalski's face. It was a video taken from row 2 of Flight 909. The angle was shaky, but the audio was crystal clear. It showed Captain Rick Holloway sneering. "You should have just moved to row 34, boy." It showed Isaiah sitting calmly. And then it showed the violence. It showed Kowalski grabbing Isaiah by the neck. It showed the glasses crunching under the boot. It showed Isaiah being dragged like a sack of garbage while passengers screamed. The caption on the video read, "Skyline Airways pilot and NYPD assault black billionaire over a seat. Boycott Skyline." Kowalski dropped the phone on the desk. It clattered next to the black Amex. "Oh, God," Kowalski whispered. Isaiah looked at the phone from across the room. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just checked his watch. "Flight 909. has been in the air for 40 minutes, Isaiah said. They are over the Atlantic now. That means Captain Halloway is feeling pretty good about himself. He thinks he got away with it. Isaiah stood up and walked to the desk. Kowalski didn't stop him. Kowalski was paralyzed. "My phone call, officer," Isaiah said, extending his hand. "Give it to me. Now." Kowalski handed him the broken iPhone with trembling hands. I can talk to the captain," Kowalski stammered. We can drop the charges. This was a misunderstanding." "The charges are the least of your worries," Isaiah said, unlocking his phone. The screen was shattered, spider webs of glass cutting into his thumb, but the display still worked. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call the press. He scrolled to a contact named Arthur P. Morgan, CEO, Atlantic National Bank. Atlantic National Bank was the primary creditor for Skyline Airways. They held the leverage on the airline's operating loans, their fuel hedges, and the mortgages on their entire fleet of Boeing 787s. Isaiah pressed call. He put the phone to his ear and looked Kowalski dead in the eye. "You might want to sit down, officer. The world is about to change." The phone rang twice. "Isaiah?" The voice on the other end was confused. It was late on the East Coast. Arthur Morgan was likely at dinner or in bed. "I thought you were flying to London for the graduation. Everything okay?" "I'm not in London, Arthur," Isaiah said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a weapon of mass destruction. "I'm in a holding cell at JFK. I've just been assaulted, battered, and racially profiled by the captain and crew of Skyline Airways Flight 909. I was dragged off the plane to make room for a deadheading pilot." "Jesus Christ," Arthur breathed. "Are you hurt? Do you need me to send legal?" "I don't need legal, Arthur. I need the ledger." There was a pause on the line. Arthur Morgan was a banker of the old school, ruthless, efficient, and smart enough to know when the wind was changing direction. "What do you want to do, Isaiah?" "How much debt does Skyline Airways currently carry with Atlantic National?" Isaiah asked. "They're leveraged to the hilt," Arthur replied instantly. "About $4 billion in revolving credit, plus the capital leases on the new fleet. They're on a covenant waiver right now because they missed their EBITDA targets last quarter. We've been lenient because it's an airline. Revoke the waiver," Isaiah said. "Isaiah, revoke it, Arthur. Tonight. Right now." Isaiah's voice was cold iron. "I am the largest individual shareholder in your bank. I own 12% of your institutional float. If you do not call that note in the next 10 minutes, I will dump my entire position in Atlantic National at market open tomorrow. I will trigger a run on your stock that will make 2008 look like a picnic." It wasn't a bluff. Isaiah Sterling had the liquidity to crash a mid-sized bank before lunch. Arthur Morgan didn't hesitate. In the world of high finance, loyalty is to the money, not the client. "Okay," Arthur said. "If I call the note, they're in default immediately. Insolvency triggers. We have the right to seize assets to secure the principal." "Seize them," Isaiah commanded. "I want a writ of attachment on every asset Skyline Airways has. And Arthur? Yes? I want the fleet grounded, specifically Flight 909. It's over the ocean right now. I want it impounded the second the wheels touch the ground in Heathrow. I want that pilot to land a plane he doesn't own anymore. It's nuclear, Isaiah. It'll bankrupt them. Thousands of jobs." "They dragged me by my neck, Arthur," Isaiah interrupted, his voice cracking slightly with the suppressed rage. They stepped on my face. They humiliated me in front of the world because they thought I was nobody. If they do this to me, imagine what they do to people who can't make this phone call. Burn it down." "Done," Arthur said. "I'm waking up the GC and the risk committee. Watch the news in an hour." The line went dead. Isaiah lowered the phone. He looked at Kowalski, who was staring at him with his mouth open. The blood had drained from the officer's face. Did you just bankrupt the airline?" Kowalski whispered. "No," Isaiah said, sitting back down on the bench. "Captain Holloway did. I just signed the paperwork." The door opened again. A man in a suit walked in. It wasn't a lawyer. It was the police chief of the Port Authority, looking disheveled and terrified. "Mr. Sterling," the chief said, breathless, "please accept my deepest apologies. You are free to go. We are scrubbing the arrest record. It never happened. Please come with me to the VIP lounge. We have a doctor waiting." Isaiah stood up. He didn't look at the chief. He looked at Kowalski. "Keep the record," Isaiah said. "I want it framed." He walked out of the cell, leaving the police station behind. But he didn't leave the airport. He went straight to the private aviation terminal. He had his own Gulfstream G650ER waiting there, the jet he hadn't taken because he wanted to stay humble and fly commercial for once. As he boarded his private jet, his assistant Sarah was already waiting with an iPad and a scotch. "Sir," Sarah said, her eyes glued to the screen. "It's happening. The news is breaking. Atlantic National just issued a press release declaring Skyline Airways in default. Their stock just tanked 40% in after-hours trading." Isaiah took the scotch. "Get me a live feed of Flight 909. Sarah tapped the screen. "They are 3 hours from London. They have no idea what's happening." "Good," Isaiah said, settling into the cream leather seat of his $60 million jet. "Let's race them to London." "Sir?" "Flight plan to Heathrow. Maximum speed. I want to be on the tarmac when Rick Holloway opens that cockpit door." The engines of the Gulfstream whined to life, a sound of pure power. While Captain Holloway was cruising at 35,000 feet, sipping coffee and joking with his co-pilot about the troublemaker in 1A, the ground beneath him was crumbling. By the time he landed, he wouldn't just be unemployed. He would be the captain of a ghost ship. The karma wasn't just coming. It was supersonic. At 38,000 feet over the Irish Sea, the cockpit of Skyline Flight 909 was peaceful. The sun was just beginning to crest over the horizon, painting the clouds in hues of violet and gold. Captain Rick Holloway stretched his arms, feeling the satisfying crack of his back. "Smooth sailing," he muttered to his first officer, a younger man named David. "Told you that guy was nothing but hot air." "I'll have your job. Please. I've heard that from drunk frat boys and angry grandmothers for 20 years. David laughed nervously. He had checked the passenger manifest earlier and seen the name Sterling, but Rick had dismissed it. "Probably a car salesman with a complex," Rick had said. "Tower, Skyline 909, requesting descent into Heathrow," Rick radioed, his voice confident. There was a pause. A long, static-filled silence. Usually Heathrow approach was snappy, efficient. "Skyline 909, this is Heathrow approach." The controller's voice came back, but it sounded different, strained. "Maintain current altitude. Do not, I repeat, do not begin descent. Enter a holding pattern at waypoint Alpha." Rick frowned. "Approach, we're low on fuel reserves. We need priority." "What's the hold-up? Weather?" Negative on weather. 909. We have a situation on the ground regarding your aircraft. Stand by. Situation? Rick looked at David. What the hell does that mean? Suddenly, the AHARS system, the digital messaging system for pilots, lit up. It wasn't a message from Skyline Dispatch. It was a generic system alert. Corporate OPE suspended. All assets frozen. Do not divert. Land at LHR for immediate impound. Impound? Rick whispered, staring at the screen. What is this? He tried to call company dispatch on the satellite phone. Dead air. No answer. He tried the alternate line. Nothing. It was as if Skyline Airways had ceased to exist while they were in the air. Rick, David said, his voice trembling. Look at the iPad. I just got a signal. David held up his electronic flight bag. He had refreshed the news feed. Breaking news. Skyline Airways declares bankruptcy after creditors seize assets. Fleet grounded worldwide. And right below it, a picture of Rick's own face, a screenshot from the viral video with the headline, "The pilot who crashed an airline." Rick felt the blood drain from his face. His hands on the yoke felt numb. Approach, Skyline 909. Rick's voice cracked. We are declaring a fuel emergency. We need to land. Copy 909, the controller said, his tone icy. You are cleared for runway 27L. Be advised, you will be met by local authorities and representatives of the receivership. You are to taxi to the remote stand. Do not approach the gate. Rick brought the plane down. His hands shook so badly he had to engage the autopilot for the approach. The majestic Boeing 7LSS-7, usually a symbol of corporate might, now felt like a prison cell. As the wheels touched the tarmac with a screech of rubber, Rick looked out the side window. Usually you saw baggage trucks and fuel tankers. Today, the runway was lined with black SUVs, police cars with flashing blue lights, and standing right at the designated remote parking spot was a sleek, silver Gulfstream G650ER. It was parked perpendicular to the taxiway. Like a sentinel, Rick taxied the massive jet toward the remote stand. He shut down the engines. The hum of the turbines died away, leaving a deafening silence in the cockpit. Ladies and gentlemen, Rick said into the intercom, his voice barely a whisper. We have arrived in London. Please remain seated. He didn't have the strength to say the rest. A staircase truck pulled up to the plane. The door opened. Rick expected the police. He expected customs. Instead, the first person to walk up the stairs and stand in the doorway of the plane was Isaiah Sterling. He wasn't wearing the torn hoodie. He was wearing a bespoke Savile Row suit, navy blue, impeccable. He looked fresh, rested, and terrifyingly calm. He stood at the top of the stairs, blocking the exit. Behind him, British police officers waited, not to arrest Isaiah, but to support him. Rick Holloway stepped out of the cockpit. He saw Isaiah. He stopped dead in the galley. Welcome to London, Captain, Isaiah said. His voice carried through the quiet cabin. I believe you have something of mine. The passengers were confused. They were craning their necks, trying to see what was happening. Then, someone from the second row gasped. That's him! That's the guy they dragged off! A murmur of shock rippled through the plane. Phones came out. Recording started. Rick Holloway stood frozen. The power dynamic had shifted so violently, it gave him vertigo. 12 hours ago, he was the master of the sky, kicking a nobody off his ship. Now, he was standing in a metal tube that effectively belonged to the man he had assaulted. Mr. Sterling, Rick stammered. I was following protocol. You were following your ego, Isaiah corrected, stepping onto the plane. The flight attendants, including Brenda, shrank back against the galley walls, terrified. Brenda was pale, her hands covering her mouth. Isaiah walked right up to Rick. He didn't raise a hand. He didn't need to. This aircraft, Isaiah said, gesturing to the walls around them, is property of the Atlantic National Bank Trust, of which I am the primary executor as of 4 a.m. this morning. You are trespassing on my property, Rick. Trespassing? Rick choked out. I'm the pilot. Not anymore, Isaiah said. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a document. It was a court order, digitally signed and printed on the Gulf Stream just minutes ago. This is an injunctive relief order grounding this vessel and terminating the employment of its crew due to gross negligence and liability risk. You're fired, Rick, effective immediately. You can't do that, Rick said, looking around for support. The union represents employees of Skyline Airways, Isaiah said softly. Skyline Airways doesn't exist anymore. It's being liquidated as we speak. I bought the debt, Rick. I didn't buy the company. I bought the debt. That means I own the bones, and I'm stripping the meat. Isaiah turned to the passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice projecting with authority. My name is Isaiah Sterling. I apologize for the delay and the drama. This airline has failed you. But I haven't. He gestured to the window. I have arranged for a fleet of buses to take you to the terminal. All of you will receive full refunds for your tickets, paid personally by me. Additionally, anyone who missed a connection will be rebooked on British Airways, first class, at my expense. Cheers erupted from the cabin. People clapped. Some even cheered his name. Isaiah turned back to Rick. The captain looked small, defeated, old. But you, Isaiah said, locking eyes with Rick. And you, he nodded at Brenda. You aren't going to the terminal. The British authorities are waiting for you at the bottom of the stairs. Authorities? Brenda squeaked. Assault is a crime in the UK too, especially on an international arrival. Isaiah lied smoothly. It was actually a civil writ for endangerment, but they didn't know that. And the Civil Aviation Authority wants a word about your logbooks. It seems my audit team found some discrepancies in your flight hours, Rick. You've been flying over the legal limit to cover for your buddies. That's fraud. Rick's knees buckled. That was the nail in the coffin. He had been cooking the books to pick up extra shifts for cash. Get off my plane, Isaiah whispered. Rick Halloway, the king of the sky, walked down the stairs with his head bowed. As he reached the tarmac, 2 officers stepped forward. They didn't handcuff him, but they flanked him, escorting him into a waiting van like a common criminal. Brenda followed, weeping. Isaiah stood at the top of the stairs, watching them go. The rain had stopped. The sun was fully up now. He turned to his assistant, Sarah, who had followed him up. Sir, she said, the board of Skyline just resigned. The stock is at 0. The acquisition is ready. If you want it, we can buy the brand for pennies on the dollar. Isaiah looked at the logo on the side of the jet. Buy it, Isaiah said. Fire upper management, retrain the staff, rebrand it. What should we call it? Sarah asked. Isaiah thought for a moment. He looked at the seat 1A, where he had sat just hours ago. Call it Resilience Air, he said. And Sarah? Yes, sir? Make sure the first rule in the employee handbook is simple. Respect is the currency. Understood. Isaiah walked down the stairs. He had a graduation to get to. He was late, but he had a feeling his daughter wouldn't mind once she heard the story. The rain in Oxford was different from the rain at JFK. It was softer, misty, clinging to the ancient limestone of the colleges like a shroud. Isaiah Sterling stood under the archway of the Sheldonian Theatre, the collar of his suit jacket pressing against the bruise on his neck. It was a deep purple mark, hidden from the world, but throbbing with every beat of his heart. He checked his watch. He had made it with 11 minutes to spare. Inside the theatre, the ceremony was awash of pomp and circumstance, Latin chants, velvet robes, and the hopeful faces of the next generation. When they called Maya Sterling, Isaiah didn't just clap. He felt a lump rise in his throat that had nothing to do with the assault. He watched his daughter walk across the stage, brilliant and black and beautiful, accepting a degree in international law. She had no idea that 12 hours ago her father had been dragged across a carpet like refuse. After the ceremony, they walked through the cobbled streets. Maya stopped, frowning as she adjusted his tie. Her fingers brushed the tender spot on his neck. Isaiah flinched, imperceptibly, but she noticed. "Dad? You're moving stiffly," she said, her eyes narrowing. "And you have a cut on your jaw." "What happened?" Isaiah smiled, taking her hand. "Turbulence, sweetheart. Just a little turbulence. But we landed safely." He didn't tell her then. He didn't have to. By the time they reached the restaurant for dinner, the world was telling her for him. Every screen in the establishment, phones, tablets, the TV behind the bar, was playing the same footage. The hashtag Georgia Boycott Skyline was trending globally, but a new one was rising even faster. Sterling checkmate. 1 week later, the hearing captain Rick Halloway sat in a hearing room that smelled of floor wax and impending doom. It wasn't a courtroom. It was the disciplinary tribunal of the Federal Aviation Administration, convened in an emergency session due to the high-profile nature of the incident. Rick wore a suit that used to fit him better. He looked hollowed out. The arrogance that had filled the cockpit of Flight 909 had evaporated, leaving behind a shaky, terrified old man. Across the table sat the FAA investigators and a lawyer representing the receivership of Skyline Airways. The lawyer wasn't there to defend Rick. He was there to feed him to the wolves to save the assets. "Captain Halloway," the lead investigator said, adjusting his glasses, "we have reviewed the cockpit voice recorder, the cabin video, and the sworn statements of the crew. But more damning are your logbooks." Rick swallowed hard. I can explain the discrepancies." "There are no discrepancies, Mr. Halloway. There is fraud," the investigator said, his voice dry and final. "You have been flying over the federally mandated hour limits for 3 years. You have been falsifying rest periods. You have been endangering passengers to pick up extra paychecks." "I was doing the company a favor," Rick burst out, sweat beading on his forehead. "We were short-staffed." "You were breaking the law," the investigator countered. "And your conduct toward Mr. Sterling, well, that speaks to a character deficit we cannot regulate, but we can certainly penalize." The gavel didn't bang. It just tapped, a soft sound that ended a 30-year career. "Richard Halloway, your air transport pilot certificate is hereby revoked, permanently. You are barred from holding a flight crew position on any commercial aircraft in the United States. This board is adjourned." Rick sat in the chair long after the room had emptied. He looked at his hands, the hands that used to control 300 tons of machinery. Now, they were just hands, unemployed, unemployable hands. 3 months later, the rebirth. The skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan that once housed the headquarters of Skyline Airways was buzzing with construction crews. Workers were rappelling down the glass facade, scraping off the old blue letters. Inside the boardroom on the 50th floor, Isaiah Sterling stood at the head of a massive oak table. The room was filled with the best minds in aviation, logistics, and hospitality. People he had headhunted from the top competitors. "We are not building another airline," Isaiah said, his voice quiet but commanding the room's absolute attention. "The world has enough airlines. We are building a standard." He clicked a remote. The screen behind him illuminated with a new logo, a golden phoenix rising from a stylized globe. Resilience Air. "Skyline failed because they thought they were in the transportation business," Isaiah continued, pacing slowly. "They thought their job was to move cattle from point A to point B. They were wrong. We are in the hospitality business. Every person who steps onto our planes is a guest in my home. And nobody gets dragged out of my home." He looked at the new chief of operations. "What is the status of the former crew?" "We've rehired 80% of the ground staff and cabin crew, sir," the COO reported. "They are undergoing mandatory retraining on conflict de-escalation and bias. However, we terminated the specific crew members involved in the incident with cause." "And the pilot?" Isaiah asked. "Holloway is destitute, sir. He lost his pension in the bankruptcy proceedings because it wasn't protected. He's currently working security in Seattle." Isaiah nodded, his face unreadable. He didn't smile. Revenge wasn't about enjoying the suffering of others. It was about ensuring the balance was corrected. "Good," Isaiah said. "Let's get to work." 6 months later. The gatekeeper. The Pacific Northwest winter was unforgiving. A freezing sleet lashed sideways against the port of Seattle, turning the shipping yards into a gray, industrial wasteland. Rick Holloway sat inside the Guard Shack 4, a fiberglass box barely large enough for a chair and a heater that only worked intermittently. He wore a uniform that scratched his neck. The badge on his chest read, "Secure Corp." His life had shrunk. His house was gone, sold to pay legal fees. His wife had left him a month after the money ran out, citing irreconcilable differences, which Rick knew was code for, "I didn't sign up to be poor." He spent his days checking manifests and buzzing in trucks. It was a humiliation ritual that lasted 12 hours a shift. Rick stared at the small portable TV he kept on the desk. The local news was playing a segment on holiday travel. "Travelers are raving about the new Resilience Air experience," the reporter chirped, standing in a terminal that looked more like a hotel lobby. "With wider seats, mandatory compassion training for staff, and a CEO who personally replies to customer complaints, it's the highest-rated airline of the year." The camera cut to a clip of Isaiah Sterling cutting a ribbon. He looked powerful, untouchable. Rick felt a surge of bile. He turned off the TV. A loud horn blasted outside. Rick jumped. A massive 18-wheeler was idling at the gate, its air brakes hissing impatiently. Rick grabbed his clipboard and slid open the window. The cold air slapped him in the face. "You're holding up the line, buddy," the driver yelled down. "Just doing my job," Rick muttered. "I need to see your bill of lading and ID." The driver handed down the paperwork. Rick looked at the header on the invoice. Sterling Horizon Logistics, a division of the Sterling Group. Rick froze. He looked at the truck. It was a Sterling truck. He looked at the shipping container behind it. It was stamped with the Sterling logo. He looked around the yard. Every third container had that name on it. He realized with a sinking, nauseating clarity that he wasn't just working a dead-end job. He was guarding Isaiah Sterling's property. Even here, at the bottom of the world, he was still an employee of the man he had tried to crush. "Hey!" the driver shouted. "Is there a problem?" Rick looked up. The driver was a young black man, wearing a warm, high-quality jacket with the Sterling logo on the breast. He looked comfortable. He looked respected. "No," Rick whispered, his voice trembling. "No problem." He stamped the paper. "Approved." "Drive safe," Rick said, handing it back. "Thanks, old-timer," the driver said, rolling up his window. Rick watched the truck rumble past. As it turned, mud splattered onto the window of the guard shack, obscuring his view. Rick grabbed a rag and started to wipe it off. He scrubbed and scrubbed, but the stain remained. He was the captain of nothing now. Just a man in a box, wiping mud off glass, while Isaiah Sterling owned the sky. The epilogue: high above the clouds, on board the flagship Resilience air flight from New York to London, Isaiah sat in seat 1A. It was the same seat. But the plane was different. The lighting was warm amber. The staff moved with grace and genuine smiles. The flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah, approached him. "Mr. Sterling?" she asked softly. "Captain Davies wanted to know if the temperature in the cabin is to your liking." Isaiah looked up from his book. He looked at the empty seat across the aisle. He remembered the crunch of his glasses, the feeling of the carpet burning his skin, the laughter of Rick Halloway. "It's perfect, Sarah," Isaiah said. "Tell the captain. Tell him we're right on course." He looked out the window at the endless horizon. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in gold, the color of royalty, the color of resilience. Karma hadn't just hit back, it had built a monument. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of the $6 billion phone call. It's a story that reminds us of a fundamental truth. Arrogance is the most expensive luxury in the world. Rick Halloway thought he was paying with a seat upgrade, but he ended up paying with his career, his legacy, and his life. Isaiah Sterling didn't scream. He didn't fight the police. He simply waited until he had the leverage, and then he pulled the lever. He turned a moment of absolute humiliation into an empire of dignity. It's the ultimate checkmate. I want to know what you think. Was Isaiah's reaction too harsh? Did Rick deserve to lose everything? Or was the punishment fitting for the crime? Let's get a debate going in the comment section below. I'll be pinning the best arguments. If this story satisfied your need for justice, please hit that like button. It helps get these stories out to more people. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring the notification bell. We drop new stories of revenge, karma, and drama every week, and you don't want to miss the next one. Until next time, fly safe, treat people with respect, and remember, you never know who's sitting in seat 1A.